Welcome to Table for One. I'm the narrator, and in today's video, we'll be talking about Earthborne Rangers. We've got something special in today's video. I will be sharing with you today an interview with Andrew Fischer of Earthborne Games. I was able to meet with Andrew at PAX Unplugged at the end of 2024, and we set up an interview to talk about Earthborne Rangers and other things that Earthborne Games is doing. And so we recorded that interview towards the end of January of 2025, but I held on to it waiting for my own copy of Earthborne Rangers to arrive, which it now has, and so I'm releasing that interview at the same time as my Earthborne Rangers unboxing video, so those are both available now today. And if you're watching this in the future, this video is released in July of 2025, so I've been sitting on this interview for about 6 months. But I really appreciate Andrew taking the time to speak with me. It was a great discussion, and just so you know, there's not a lot to see in this video. I'll play in the background some of the unboxing from my Earthborne Rangers unboxing video, but you can think of this more like a podcast, and you can just get the audio if that's something you like to do. But again, big thanks to Andrew and Earthborne Games. I'm very appreciative of their time, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Let me know what you think. Let's get rolling. All right, so I am here with Andrew Fischer from Earthborne Games. We had the opportunity to meet at PAX Unplugged a couple months ago and just chatted for a few minutes. And he kindly agreed to join me for a brief interview. So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity real quick. Would you like to introduce yourself? Anything else you'd like us to know?
Yeah, sure. My name's Andrew Fischer. I'm the design director at Earthborne Games. Our main game, Earthborne Rangers, came out. Oh, when did we actually release that? A couple of years ago, I think, with our first printing, and we are just fulfilling probably our second larger printing reprint campaign. Well, I mean, as when this comes out, we will have fulfilled a decent amount of it, I think. So, and then we have a brand new game coming out, Hub World Eidolon. And in addition to all that, I also do some other contract work. I am probably most well known for being the lead designer on the Cosmere role-playing game in addition to all of this. So that's me, or at least my current history. We won't dig into my full work history here, but yeah.
Well, that's a heck of a resume. So thanks again for taking some time. And let's jump right in. So Earthborne Rangers is kind of known for sustainability, and I definitely want to talk about that. That's going to be an important part of our discussion today. But storytelling, and it seems like nonviolent confrontation seem to be important to that ethos as well. And I was wondering, like, how deeply do these ideas inform the design of the game? And then maybe how do storytelling and nonviolence play out mechanically?
Yeah, so storytelling is obviously like that's like at the very root of the game, and you can see that throughout, whether it be the big kind of branching narrative campaign booklet that you read, and you'll be reading right as you first dive into the game, but also just in kind of the focus, even in the card game mechanics, how much, mechanics are there to kind of create little emergent stories for you, as well as like reading the booklet when you integrating those two. So storytelling's like fully baked in, and I think most people will kind of see that. The nonviolence thing is interesting. So that's also very kind of fundamental to the setting. And I wouldn't even necessarily say non-violence, because there is violence in the game. Predators can hunt prey. You can harm basically anything in the game if you want to, or sometimes by accident or things. But one of the core principles of the Earthborne setting that Andrew Navarro was very passionate about in creating it was this kind of optimistic view of humanity's future. So while there is violence, it is not violence for kind of selfish or destructive ends. You won't find like human bad guys, quote unquote, in this game, right? You won't find people who are antagonists just to be antagonists. There's definitely misunderstandings. People who both sides of an issue mean well, but they don't agree. And so, or like accidents happen or these other things. So there's other forms of conflict and conflict between people, but there's no kind of harming people just to harm them. There's no kind of war out of like selfish desire for resources and things. It assumes that everybody is fundamentally good and acting in the interest of other people. Um, and so that kind of pervades everything in our approach to the game. You, like I said, you can do there is like harm that befalls things, and things can fight each other, like predators who are in a territorial dispute or hunting prey might, kill that prey to eat it. But and so that does manifest in gameplay, but there's no like default attack action, something that's fundamentally at the base of a lot of kind of role playing or card games. You can get weapons and equip them, but it's kind of on that second layer where you have to choose to run a weapon, include it in your deck, play it out to even be able to do that. It's not a default assumption of the game. And it definitely bucks some kind of standards or things that other folks are used to in a lot of similar card games and role playing games. But at the end of the day, how that plays out differently, you'll be doing a lot of the same things. You'll try to connect with animals or talk to people, and you'll make tests, and that test will determine how many tokens go on a thing, and you have to build up a certain number of tokens. If you stripped off all the names and we're just looking at the mechanics without kind of the theme applied, you could, you're like doing damage. You're
Sure.
you're adding up tokens until a thing occurs. So you'll see a lot of similar dynamics to what you're used to in other games, but it's themed very differently so that it kind of evokes these different stories that aren't necessarily about fighting or anything.
Sure. And it just seemed to be like a very thoughtful and intentional approach that was clearly like not an accident. So
Oh
wanted to
yeah,
make
I
sure I at
mean,
least touched on it.
it's in fact it's a lot of work too. Not only to break ourselves out of those patterns, but like every designer we work with comes in with a lot of experience from other games that assume violence at the core of them, and so breaking ourselves out of these patterns is like a lot of work actually.
So, you kind of touched on this that Earthborne Rangers, take sort of a hopeful view of the future. And I imagine that that's reflected by the company's philosophy as a whole because it's called Earthborne Games. It's no secret that Earthborne Rangers wasn't going to be your only game either. And so I know there's currently a new campaign launch that's approaching. And really, my question here is: should we expect this same sort of hopeful tone to carry over into non-Ranger games, or do you think are you leaving yourself some wiggle room for some, I don't know, darker themes or that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, we actually we just got a question like this on our own podcast that we talked about in our recording, I think just yesterday. I think it's a good question. And Hub World Eidolon, our new game, is competitive as opposed to Rangers, which is solo or co-op. And so fundamentally, it is a little bit more conflict oriented. And that setting is this kind of sci-fi setting. It's set in a big city, and it's set in a city that's undergoing a lot of change. It was kind of it's a hub world, like think of like a shipping transit hub. However, these aliens have recently, this one faction has invented basically portals, which you can imagine completely disrupts a transit hub and its purpose.
Mhm.
And so it is this sci-fi metropolis that is undergoing a lot of identity change, which obviously has a lot of comparisons to modern life. And you can assume that it's going to have some more difficult themes and maybe not be as like cozy as something like the Earthborne setting. So the quick answer is that no, not everything will always be the same as the Earthborne setting, and we are not like afraid to explore difficult or dark themes. However, our settings are still always trying to, one, do things differently than a lot of other storytellers or game makers out there do, just in kind of bucking trends, but also like we are kind of looking towards putting out art that kind of steers and points and informs our culture, right? We're trying to create this art that like is putting kind of good out into the world and this positivity out in the world to kind of steer us in that direction, in a different direction than a lot of other people are. And so you will always find that at the core of our settings. That doesn't mean the setting itself might not have grim parts to it, but there'll always be some kind of optimism and positivity about humanity and the way we interact and everything. So how exactly that manifests isn't always going to manifest in like the kind of cozy sci-fi like Rangers, uh, but it will always be there.
I have not played Earthborne Rangers yet. I'm awaiting my copy, but I like that about Earthborne Rangers. So far, like I like that hopeful tone and setting. So I don't want you to think that I'm pushing this in a different direction with this next question as well. But this is just something I was thinking about as I wait for this game, and I kind of look into the lore a little bit and check the rule books and watch playthroughs and that sort of thing. But from what I understand of the world of Earthborne Rangers, you can look at it maybe at a different angle where you see that humans have drastically reshaped the world through genetics and other technological means. And now the world of Earthborne Rangers is vibrant and it's thriving, but it isn't quite natural anymore. And it's a world we might recognize today as being maybe more alien than Earth-like. So through that lens, I wonder if maybe you and the team at Earthborne Games are poking around the edges of this question of whether humanity did, in fact, in quotes, save the planet in this world or not, or have we, is it too permanently altered to say that it's saved? Or I think that's more of an interesting philosophical line of questioning. I'm just wondering, was that an intentional line of questioning? And is that something that players can go and start to like pull on that thread and unravel it through the gameplay?
Yeah, well, so we explore some of those themes. We don't necessarily attach a value judgment to like whether you saved it or not, right? Like primarily just because where this setting is set, how far away from those events, and how little of that history remains concrete for these people. You're not like philosophically discussing exactly what took place. So we don't necessarily explore a lot of value judgments on those events so far in the past. But we are looking at this very human altered and human authored world. And you'll see that, to not spoil too much, you will see that very laced throughout the story we tell and the decisions we give you. A like human intervention versus non-intervention or like the natural world is a very heavy theme throughout. And like in many ways, we try to not just ask the question, do you interfere or don't you, but also what does it mean to interfere? And in a world that is already human made, what even is natural anymore, right? What is intervention versus fixing our own mistakes? These questions are explored through different missions and different problems that come up throughout our campaign quite thoroughly. And like, obviously, the Earthborne setting is a lot more human authored in some ways, or feels a lot more human authored than some of our natural world right now. But like fundamentally, these are questions we're already grappling with in it. Like every animal population on the entire planet has been altered by us in some way, right? Or affected by us. So we're already living in this human authored world. It's just way more apparent in a setting where you can run into animals that were genetically created by humans, ancient humans in a lab.
Sure. And personally, this is just me talking, but I like that approach of not placing a value judgment in the game itself, because I think that leaves a lot of opportunities for the players to then wrestle with these questions a little bit. And I think that makes the game interesting and memorable, and it lets you take something away from the table that you may think about in other parts of your life. As you're saying, you're giving real life examples. So I just think that's somewhat unique in the gameplay space, and I think it's cool. So that's not a question. That's just I think it's cool.
I appreciate it, and that's the hope. There are obviously like some implicit value judgments that show up, right? Like we
Sure.
are going to show our values through what problems we present to you, and also just like I talk about this optimistic setting, but obviously it is our view of optimism, right? So like there's
Sure.
value judgments just in what we show as this more idyllic life.
So maybe I'll start to transition a little bit into more concrete. I'll get away from some of these philosophical questions, but they're fun. But some more concrete questions about sustainability that we had kind of talked about a little bit previously. But I think it's fair to classify Earthborne Rangers as a card game. And it seems just from the pre-launch information on Hubworld Eidolon that appears to be a card game as well. So I imagine that card games are, this is relatively speaking, simpler to produce sustainably than say a game that has a lot of miniatures. And so
Yeah,
it's just
100%.
and I don't know, personally, I'm not like a miniatures person, but regardless, that's just one example. But is sustainable production ever like a roadblock or a constraint to your creative direction? Or maybe if I put it differently, like does sustainability ever stop you from doing some of the things that you would like to do?
So, game design wise on Rangers and Eidolon, it hasn't stopped us a ton, but that is because, to your point, our fundamental and early decision to make them exclusively card games. That decision was partly informed because card games are easy to make sustainably, but also just we all love card games. And like, Andrew Navarro loves card games, so that was part of the reason he wanted to make the first game Earthborne made this card game. So that makes it
Mhm.
kind of that makes it easy. But so on Rangers, we have not faced a lot of hard decisions gameplay wise with regards to sustainability. That being said, I've done some work on a couple different speculative board games for the studio
Mhm.
and like early prototypes and things, and those immediately hit roadblocks. One cool way to mess with and make innovative things in board games is through interesting componentry, and like you almost you basically have to do anything that's like a complex shape you're going to want to do through like injection molded plastic, which there's almost no way to do sustainably. There are bioplastics, but even those, the team from the University of Illinois we worked with showed that sustainability wise, those are even worse than like a synthetically lacquered wood. As far as like, so like those bioplastics, they're okay, but they're expensive and they're not that sustainable. And so, as we looked at board games, we were looking at things we could do with wood or with punchboard that we can do through sustainably sourced paper.
Mhm.
So a lot of potential roadblocks there, not a lot of roadblocks in Rangers and Eidolon.
Okay, fair enough. And then, Earthborne Games uses crowdfunding, but so far has avoided the sort of typical stretch goal model. And I was wondering if you can maybe talk about that decision a little bit.
Yeah, I like a lot of stretch goals are kind of fundamentally about more stuff, right?
Hmm.
Like ultimately, we want to include exactly what you need for the game to be its best and nothing more because that's extra stuff. Like part
Yeah.
of being sustainable is like making exactly what you need to make. We can do stretch goals that aren't stuff, right? You could do more like content in the game or quality upgrades or things like that. But we also, I don't know, we just didn't want to kind of chase that same model. So our on our first campaign, we only had one stretch goal, which was local production, which unfortunately we ended up not being, even though we hit the goal, we weren't able to fully fulfill there, but we managed to fulfill it for our reprint campaign. So not perfect, but we did manage to get there. So we've messed around with them a little, but we just didn't want to kind of chase that more mentality that a lot of other campaigns did.
Yeah. And, that's a little bit what I suspected, but I think that's just an important, different angle to this sustainability question. It's not just about the materials that we're using, but like what does the game need? And let's just make that rather than like add more stuff just to have more stuff. So,
Yeah, and like I don't know, I'm not like the crowdfunding expert here, but like anecdotally, my impression is that more people are drifting away from like stretch goal structure. Like I feel like we've seen more of that in recent years. And I think it's just like we kind of reached ultimate saturation with it. And there's a certain amount of burnout on it because like it's no longer exciting. It's just kind of expected. And it's almost overwhelming and exhausting for a lot of like average people who back a campaign. They just like they scroll down the like giant ladder of stretch goals that are already unlocked and just like zone out and don't even pay attention to everything that's come out. And so because of that, I think we've seen a lot more people, maybe not fully abandon them, but like, only do like half a dozen stretch goals total for the whole campaign, which is relatively reserved. And or just do no stretch goals at all. I feel like we've seen more people drift away from that model. So we were just slightly ahead of the curve on that, but I think it's a kind of a trend.
let me pivot here to ask you maybe about a win. Let me give you a chance to talk about a win. So, what single change do you think, like whether it be in the design process or manufacturing or distribution, what one change in the sustainability realm do you think had the greatest impact on your goals, or maybe put slightly differently, but if you can, wave a magic wand and you can get all game studios to make the same one single sustainability change, what do you think it should be? Like, what would have the greatest impact?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think it would be local production. Don't get me wrong, we still, like just because you produce locally, quote unquote, like we're producing for Europe and for North America, and there's still a lot of transit involved. Uh, you still have to get to the fulfillment and distribution centers, and then you have to ship all those out, and then you have to do last mile. There's a lot of fuel burned and things. So getting rid of freight is still just a smaller percentage of it. But I would think that's probably one of the larger impacts is kind of like fighting against this globalized distribution. But I'm kind of tied between that actually and no plastic. And not just like miniatures. Honestly, like miniatures are fine. Shrink wrap, I should say no
Mm,
single use plastic, right? Think about a game where the game itself is in shrink wrap, and then every single pack of cards is in shrink wrap. Sometimes they're
hmm.
like in shrink wrap in a bag, and like you've got all of this plastic that you just ball up and immediately get rid of. Of those, shrink wrap's probably the hardest to replace just because it protects your boxes really well. Like you have all those boxes in a case, and the case is like in transit. Think about that rubbing over time, right? Like
Yeah.
that shrink wrap's really valuable, and that's a lot harder to replace. But if everybody just got rid of all their single-use plastics in the board game industry, like that probably would be a bigger impact than no freight, international freight. But I don't know. We had a team of grad students who they were separately kind of doing this project and kind of used us as their I don't know what the academic term for it is, but not quite a case study because they were looking at options for us and they're sort of kind of using us to direct some of their research. Even their comparisons were they compared apples to apples, not like the impact of shrink wrap against freight, right? They weren't they
Sure.
were comparing like, oh, what's the impact of shrink wrap versus coated paper or something.
Yeah, but I mean that's at least on my channel. I unbox the games that I get, and like I don't have a massive collection, but when I get something, I'm going to film an unboxing, and I always point out like whether it's is the box enclosed with shrink wrap or is it a sticker? Are the cards wrapped in paper? Are they wrapped in plastic? Is it recyclable? Like, so it's definitely something at least I'm paying attention to, and I imagine others are as well. And I don't know, I've never made a board game. That seems like it would be an easier switch than local production anyway, just based off of
Definitely.
the Earthborne Rangers campaign updates. It seems like you guys have had your hands full, and I mean, it seems like you're doing a great job with it. And I'm super impressed, if I'm being honest. But yeah, the local production seems harder, and maybe a quicker win could be if everybody would just switch to paper.
Yes, switching to paper or getting rid of single-use plastics definitely
Yeah.
easier. It has its own challenges because it's all about what factories are able and willing to supply,
Hmm.
and board game factories especially kind of have a industry standard way of doing things. And so even if other industries have materials we can use, it doesn't necessarily mean that the factories we're using have a regular supply of those materials. And if they single order something, it's very expensive. So it can be a little tricky, but I think will probably be able to cite a bunch of studios that have started doing this, and it's becoming more and more common. Um,
Hmm.
Jamie Stegmaier at Stonemaier Games did a big push in the recent years to start making their games more sustainable, which, them being a really big producer helped push Panda, one of the bigger
Hmm.
Chinese manufacturers, to start supplying things like FSC paper as well as shrink wrap alternatives. And then everybody who uses Panda, which is like a lot of the board game industry,
Yeah.
can
Most.
also take advantage of that.
Let me ask you about this because I found this interesting. This just kind of sticks in my brain. So I've heard it said. I can't remember if anybody at Earthborne Games has said this specifically, but I've heard it said that you can take your Earthborne Rangers game when you're done with it, and you can bury it in the ground, and it'll fully compost. So that's like a really fun and memorable thing to talk about. But I guess my question is this real? Will it compost? And if so, just for fun, have you heard of anyone doing this?
It's I believe Andrew Navarro said this, and it is true. I guess we have not confirmed it ourselves yet. We did joke that like we should like put a trail cam pointed at like my compost bin and just do like a live composting running on our website until it fully composts. But we have not done that yet. But we have like disintegrated a card, right? Like
Sure.
uh, and ultimately, if your game is all paper, it's pretty easy to achieve that goal. The big thing is like the coatings and inks being fully natural and biodegradable, right? Like
Hmm.
that's the coatings especially is the big hump to get there. So I do not know if anybody who has composted their copy of Rangers yet, but maybe we'll get there.
Well, if you decide to set up that live cam, you let me know.
Yeah, I will.
So let's say you don't want to bury your game. Under normal circumstance, I think the folks who are buying this game want to play it and probably want to play it for a while. So what's your take on how will these components hold up over the long run? And then more maybe more of a philosophical question, but what is like the long run in your view? Like how long should game components last?
Well, assuming you're storing it someplace dry,
Mhm.
uh, it will last just as long as any of your other games. We had a couple people right when we were first fulfilling the game who kind of claimed that the cards were easier to nick, but like the coatings, the water aqueous based coatings instead of the UV based coatings.
Mhm.
In our actual use in practice, we have not seen any difference in wear. If there's any durability difference, it's between cord cards. So like a magic card or like poker originally did this is like black core, which is the card is basically filled with this glue plastic stuff, and like
Mhm.
it's a little firmer. We do a slightly thicker paper stock to help imitate the stiffness, but like if you bend a core card and then you bend one of our cards, the core cats cards do spring back a little better than ours do. So that's probably our biggest durability difference, but frankly, it's pretty minimal. Your game is not going to biodegrade. It's not going to compost on your shelf, assuming
Yeah.
you're not putting it in like your 100% humidity basement or something. At the point that you notice a difference in the breakdown of Rangers against one of a game that's like UV coated, your UV coated game would be ruined as well. Our cards would fully disintegrate, whereas your UV coated cards would just look disintegrated, but like, maybe that clear coating on the front would still like be holding things in place a little bit, but you wouldn't want to use that game. So like at the point you notice the difference, both products are fully ruined anyway. So uh, you don't have to worry about your game composting on your shelf.
Good to know. So I personally like have never really played any trading card games, collectible card games, living card games, which I know are all slightly different, but they share, a lot of the same DNA. But Earthborne Rangers is a living card game. Yes, I got that.
Well, technically, I don't even know what we call it. We call it like a customizable card game or something. Living card game is technically a trademark that belongs to
Mm,
Fantasy Flight Games. So
okay.
we don't, but it is basically the same model where you're buying fixed sets of cards. Like you buy Rangers, you get the whole campaign and all the cards you need to play it. And if we expand that at all, it will be in a discrete set of cards. You're not buying anything randomized or anything.
And yeah, I know that's an important distinction that you're not just buying a pack and see what you get, and if you don't get what you want, you get another pack, and that I guess goes completely against the ethos of a lot of what else you're doing. But I guess my question was about the future of that particular IP. Like what kind of and I don't know, maybe you don't have any information to share, but what kind of release timeline is expected? Is this like is there regularly going to be new content, or just as you feel it's needed? And I know I've ordered, and again, I haven't put my hands on these yet, but for example, I've got Moments on the Path as well as Legacy of the Ancestors. And those are very different sizes from what I can tell, the amount of
Yeah.
content in those two packages. So like what is there a normal we should like a typical size, or is it all over the place? Um,
Well, so we're kind of doing a couple different product sizes right now. So we have Legacy of the Ancestors is a campaign expansion. So that
mhm,
is basically the equivalent of all the story content in our core set. It's like a second campaign that follows the events of the first. It's the same as all the story content. So it's basically the core set minus all the player cards. You're just playing some new content. There are reward cards which go in your deck, but that you unlock through the content, but none of like the deck building stuff. Then we have a smaller box that is called the Stewards of the Valley is the one that came
mhm.
alongside Legacy. That is player cards. So that just adds new player cards. It's not quite as many player cards as in the core, but it's like a decent chunk. It adds new options and adds a few new cards for all the sets you had in the core set. So that's more like character cards and ways you can build your rangers. And then, yeah, moments is just a small supplemental thing that adds a little bit of variety to the path deck and these kind of things that sprinkle and mix up the emergent storytelling a bit more. So those are kind of our three main sizes. Moments is
Mhm.
just this little splash, and then we have the ranger cards and the campaign. So you can expect more ranger cards and campaigns of the same size from us. We'll probably do additional crowdfunding campaigns when those come out. Our current plan for the game line is to do 2 more campaigns after Legacy. And then that will be kind of the end of the Rangers story. There will likely be Ranger cards that come out alongside each of those campaigns, new boxes that expand your options. And when we finish there, it doesn't necessarily mean the game line is done per se, but it does mean that after that point, we'll probably go on to tell a different story, like explore new themes beyond this. So it doesn't mean that like that's the end of Rangers, but it does mean that's the end of the arc we are planning for this set. Besides that, I don't think we've talked specifics, but there will be a couple other things, moment size and a bit larger, that sprinkle in a bit of additional optional things that you can kind of add on to your game. So beyond that kind of core of the big 4 campaign tentpole releases, we'll have some other things you can buy to like go on little adventures or add variety to your game. And those will come out sprinkled throughout our larger release plan.
Okay, well, that's a lot of good information. So thank you for sharing that. Just so we have some idea, and obviously, we're speaking in January of 2025. Anything could happen in the future, but
Yeah,
that's where you're at
things
today.
can change, right? But
Sure.
that's our current plan. And as far as when you can expect it, we don't have like a regular release schedule for Rangers, but Maxine Maxine Newman, who's the lead designer on Rangers now, she is working on Rangers constantly and consistently, and I'm helping her. I kind of oversee several different projects for us, but I help her with a percentage of my time. So we are just bowling ahead on Rangers, and we'll kind of release it as we finish various content.
Now seems like maybe a good opportunity to let you tell us. There's potentially some people who are listening to this who are hearing about Earthborne Rangers for the first time. For those folks, and keep in mind we've got viewers in the U.S. but also viewers all over the place. So how might people get a copy if they're interested? Get a copy in Earthborne Rangers, and then I guess part 2 are there other ways to enjoy this game if a print copy is not available? Are there print and plays, digital, that sort of
Mm.
thing?
So we do have a demo available on TTS.
Mhm.
I think you can actually find a link on our website, and we do have. I think the demo is available from a couple of our partners, like Frosted Games in Germany as well. But you'll have to go to if you look up Rangers and your country, you can kind of see. We've got Fantasia in Italy, we've got Maldito in Spain, we've got Intrafin in France. You can kind of go look and see if they offer a demo, but we do have that available for people who want to just check out the game first digitally. It's just our own hack together tabletop simulator environment, so don't expect the most polished TTS experience you've ever had, but you'll be able to play the game.
Yeah.
Beyond that, how do you get a copy? Well, right at this moment, I guess by the time this comes out, we'll probably have stuff available. Right now, we are still fulfilling our reprint campaign, so not much is available. But once our reprint campaign fulfills, if you're in North America, your best option is to go to the Team Covenant website, which is the main retailer we use, and you can just order a copy of the game there. They will have a pretty big supply after this printing gets done, and you can just buy the game there. If you're in Europe, for an English copy, your best option is to go to the Naylor Games web store. They are kind of distributing it in the UK and other European English copies. Past that, for getting it localized into your language, like I said, Frosted in Germany, Intrafin in Spain, Intrafin in France, Maldito in Spain, Fantasia in Italy, and then we have a few other partners coming soon, including in China and Korea. And so we're kind of working on a bunch of different copies. And for those, you kind of have to look to those studios to find out where to get it. However, we are in distribution in Europe. So in Europe, you can likely go to your friendly local game store and pick up a copy there.
Excellent. Well, that's a lot of options. So thank you. Appreciate it. Were there any sustainability either ideas you had or changes you would have wanted to make that you really wanted to implement and just couldn't make it happen? And if so, like what would have to change to make that possible in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because of its nature as a card game, I asked Andrew about this as well before I came on, just because I was kind of thinking about it. There weren't a ton of things we weren't able to do because it was just a card game. Obviously, if we had done other components, there had been a lot of other things. We regretted not being able to do the local manufacturing the first time around.
Hmm.
We are glad we can do it now, and we hope to continue doing that in the future. But that was something that we were a little disappointed by. Beyond that, to kind of the shrink wrap versus other options discussion, and I was talking about how options exist outside of our industry and we don't have able to get it.
Hmm.
There are biodegradable shrink wraps, and it would have been great if we could just do that. We ended up doing stickers, but like I said, we don't have that protection. Some people do a paper wrap around it. We don't have the protection when it kind of jostles in the case during transport. So like sometimes the games can get scuffed or things. And those stickers, like people who got the first printing know that like the adhesive that was on them, like they were just a brand new thing to our factory, and like the adhesive ended up being way more gummy than we'd wanted, and like the stickers stuck over some of the text on the back of the box, and like it just wasn't like the ideal solution for sealing our box. So I think being able to get like a biodegradable shrink would have been awesome, but it wasn't an option for us.
But again, I do want to reiterate, congrats on the second time through getting the North American manufacturing, because I've talked on this topic to other game studios as well, and have only as an outsider the smallest inkling of how difficult that is. So
Um,
I'm appreciative of it. It's pretty cool.
yeah, we're we're definitely in the middle of it right now, so I'm feeling it. But like we're in the
Hmm.
middle of the difficulties of coordinating multiple factories to print components with like color matching. It's especially to get slightly in the weeds. It's especially the pain in the butt because we use a lot of like earth tones. Um,
Hmm.
and earth tones are just royally difficult to color match because they use a little bit of all the colors of ink in the CMYK spectrum. And because of that, any little difference is actually a high percentage change in the mix. And so it's super hard to get those earth tones, light earth tones color matched. So we're right in the middle of like trying to get all of that consistent. So I'm feeling it.
Yeah, I imagine. I've been keeping up with the Game Found updates on this most recent campaign. So, but yeah, kudos to you and the team. Let me close with this one. So I'm not just sure. I've seen plenty of interviews with you, and heard interviews. You talk a great deal about sustainability, and you're asked questions about it pretty frequently. But Earthborne Rangers is more than a sustainably manufactured product. It's a game, right? Like it's a game in its own right, and one that people I think rightfully seem pretty excited about. So what would you like to share about Earthborne Rangers that you don't get to talk about enough?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I like we talk a lot. We do a we do a podcast where we just kind of ramble into our microphones for like 2 hours every couple weeks. So like we
I
actually
understand.
get to talk quite a bit. I think I mean my actual answer to this as to what I don't get to talk enough about, I still can't talk about with you because it's like it's the end of the game, and like people are fairly sensitive about spoilers understandably because it's this kind of very narrative heavy game. And because of that, we don't actually talk about the end of the game that much. So I definitely talking about that later stuff is something I'd love more opportunity to do. We think we'll probably do like a spoilery episode of our podcast where it's just like only listen to this episode if you finished the game kind of episode. So we'll get an opportunity to do so soon. Other than that, though, one thing I love about the game that we talk a lot about like the manufacturer, and we talk a lot of we get questions about like technically how you technically implement mechanics and things and like the storytelling. But one thing I think is kind of interesting about Rangers that I think has helped it hit home for some people is we definitely took another big step. There's other cooperative card games slash solo card games like it, like the Arkham Horror card game and the Lord of the Rings card game, but we took a big step towards RPGs from there, right? If there's like a
Mm.
spectrum of like very kind of just crunchy technical card game all the way to a full role playing game, and this is the spectrum, Arkham's over here, and we took one step closer to role playing games. And you can see that in how much the storytelling is integrated, but it goes so much deeper than that. One big thing about that is like there's a lot of the way the mechanics approach we approach the mechanics that are a little more role-playing game-esque. And in that, I mean like almost messier. When a role-playing game is very kind of technically tight, there's value in that. But like, I think you can see it can sometimes fight with the storytelling. I think, fourth edition and some of the reaction to that, the fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons and some of the reaction of that to that can kind of show that. It was like, it put like the tactical miniatures game to front and center. And, people kind of railed against that, right? It like got a little too mechanical and wasn't kind of messy enough in like and how narrative the mechanics are. And so in Rangers, one of the big things we did is like there's a lot of mechanics that are a little more kind of there for evoking story or for creating these kind of weird different experiences and these unique moments. And as part of that, we approach things a little more heavy exception based and narrative like a role playing game might. Sometimes people who are very kind of like technically minded struggle with that a bit. Like when some of our translators were translating it, they want to make it as technically precise as possible. And like you're trying to get them to work a little bit of woo back into it. And you'll see like in Hub World Eidolon, our next game is competitive and it's all about being a very technically precise and programmatic in your ability to answer every single rules questions very precisely to be able to resolve that kind of like competitive play and tournament play and things. But Rangers is trying more to evoke these cool, bombastic moments. And sometimes that mess can kind of get interpreted as like wishy-washy rules because it kind of is. But like, my long rambling answer to your question is that I think I don't get to talk about the value of like what those kind of messier quote unquote mechanics bring to an experience. Talk or like brag about it enough because I think if you watch like something like the Shut Up and Sit Down review that was very positive of our game, something he really latches onto are these mechanics that like probably would be designed out if we were making it very technically precise.
That's a really interesting point too, because I think there's a lot of fun to be had in that gray area. It's not being all black and white. There's this messiness in between, and to design that in from the beginning with intent, I imagine is a serious design challenge. Like because you can't just be sloppy. It's purposefully gray.
One really hard part about it is that you don't have a game master. Like in a role-playing game,
Yeah.
role-playing games get away with it to a much bigger degree than we can because, you always have the outlet of like, work with your GM to figure this out, right? Or like, the GM decides. And so you have this rules adjudicator at the table. In this co-op game, you really don't because nobody can be completely objective about how things are resolving because they're personally involved. And so designing something that is kind of messier without having the dungeon master at the table is that's the biggest challenge.
Well, I think Earthborne Rangers and I expect, future games from Earthborne Games as well are pushing multiple envelopes. You're doing new things in several different areas, both in the gameplay itself and in the manufacturing and production distribution, all just across the board. You're trying new things, and from an outsider's perspective, it seems to be going well, and it's just pretty cool to see. So, congrats to you and the team, and continue to do what you're doing. I'm excited to see what else is coming.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Hopefully you like the game and are excited about what we have coming up.
Very much. So, all right. Thank you, Andrew, for sitting down with me for an hour. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'm really looking forward to Earthborne Rangers, and again to check it out whenever this video comes out. I'll be patient, but all right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.